Please join me in giving a warm Georgia Tech welcome to our guest speaker, Ryan Jones.
No, I'm so sad. Thank you. Hey guys, you hear me all right? I'm super excited to be here today. I loved my college experience. You guys are going to one of the best institutions in the world. We founded Florence across the street in, I don't even know what the building's called. It's not Synergy, but the next one up that's basically across the street from Starbucks, where the parking office is, as part of the Flashpoint program that Merrick First, the Center for Intentional Innovation, ran. So tech is in our DNA. Speaking of DNA, what's the mix-up here? How many are undergrads? Okay, how many are grad students? Awesome. Totally intimidated right now. And others? I'm another. Awesome. And then the last question to try and figure out the DNA in the room, and there's no wrong answer. How many want to start a company at some point? How many know they don't want to start a company at some point? Okay? In 10 years, your answers will be flipped, I can guarantee it. All right, so we'll do this in 4 parts, 30 minutes. I know spring break is next week. I feel lucky to be here. I'm going to try and infuse this with some spring break vibes. Let's get started. The first thing we'll do is, you heard a little bit who the heck am I, but I don't matter as much as what me and my co-founders and team have been lucky to build. So what the heck is Florence? That gives me a little bit of credibility to talk to you guys about the entrepreneurial journey. And I think there's 2 parts to the entrepreneurial journey. You're on the first part right now. So it's your career, including your education. And then it's what you do in the first couple jobs you have outside of school. And then it's when you make the decision to start your own company with a couple of co-founders and how you go through that and what you can learn along the way. Lastly, I have an ask of you, and we'll get to that bit. Sound all right? Cool. So who is this guy? My expertise in this space is largely due to my role inside of Microsoft. I was a product manager on the SharePoint product. It's a document management product. How sexy is that? It's not sexy at all. But it was the fastest growing product inside of Microsoft in the first part of the 2000s. And I was lucky to know what fast growth felt like because of that experience. And then I left Microsoft to start things like Florence, to use my enterprise software skills for good instead of evil. And that's where we are today. So what is Florence? Let me give you a perspective of what the clinical trial ecosystem looks like. So every new therapy, every potentially blockbuster cancer drug, for example, that can stop renal cancer, that can stop prostate cancer, that can stop breast cancer, has to go through the same process under the FDA to be proven safe and effective. The way that Roche, Pfizer, and the other pharmaceutical companies do that today is they spend about, as an industry, about $25 billion a year putting people on airplanes and then flying them out to doctors' offices and setting up that doctor and her team with the tools and the documents they need to give that pill away to the first patient. $25 billion putting people on airplanes. Unfortunately, this process is now untenable in 2019. Precision medicine is this thing that says, okay, we're not going to give you chemotherapy for cancer anymore. We're going to give you an immunotherapy that targets how your body works with a specific cancer. So all of a sudden, medical indications have become much more precise, and finding patients and doing the procedures has become a lot more precise. And that's doubled the number of clinical trials that are out there. It's made them 50% more complex, but there aren't any more cancer docs running clinical trials at Emory this year than there were in 2013. So something has to give. And we were lucky by going through our entrepreneurial journey to stumble upon that thing that has to give, that these trial sites have to be more productive, and there has to be a better way than sending auditors on airplanes from Roche out to Emory or out to UCSF or out to Stanford in order to check up on these doctors. And so that's why we built Florence. So what Florence does is it gives the physician and her team their day back from paperwork. And in doing so, it connects them directly to the pharma companies that are running these studies so that everyone can communicate a lot more efficiently and drugs can get to market faster. In some cases, for some oncology indications, survival comes down to a matter of days. 45 to 90 days could make the difference as to whether the person survives and the cancer goes into remission or whether they get sick and die. And we feel lucky to work on that 45 to 90-day window. We can shrink it down with software that makes research teams more efficient so we can have a real impact on people's lives. Put another way, this is what it looks like at the best trial sites in the world. This is at Stanford. Like, this is how they organize their data today. Because the clinician's running around and trying to not only see patients throughout the normal course of her day, but they're trying to collect up the data for this study that they're running at Pfizer. So we're in the business of taking pictures that look like this and turning them into pictures that look like this. That's what we do. So that's what the heck Florence is. How did it work? How's it going today, and where did we start? The happy path. So if you do it right, you have an idea, you have a first customer, you drink a six-pack of beer, you're so pumped. Second customer, holy crap, this might be a business. You get to the nth customer, it starts to be repeatable. That all feels pretty good. Now you have a business where you're starting to see things repeatable. You've hired a sales team, you've hired people to care for your customers because now you have a few to keep track of. You start doing strategic deals where maybe your software lines up well with someone else's software in the industry, and maybe that other person is like an Athena Health and they're really big and can help you, and that feels really good. And then you have a new idea because you've seen things now that you're out in the market. Let's turn that new idea into a product, and it starts all over again. You get your first customer, you drink your six-pack, you get your second customer, you get your nth customer, that sort of thing. And some companies do that forever and become public companies and become like, General Motors, right? General Motors keeps coming up with new car models, finds new markets. They learn from the last car model that they have. They rinse and repeat. But most companies like mine, they exit at some point. We have venture investors that need to get their money back at some point. And so at some point, we'll, if things go well, we'll sell this business to a bigger company or a private equity firm that can pay back our investors, and that's the natural life cycle. And then this product goes and lives in something bigger. But that's not really what it looks like. Building a company is really a series of agonies that you suffer through, and then you are lucky enough to be invited to something like this, and you look back and you say, holy shit, we built this and it's living, but I was so miserable yesterday. So first is the agony of difference. Hate is not the opposite of love. Indifference is the opposite of love. So you will spend the first couple months with your idea and no one will care, and that'll suck. But then someone will care, and you'll realize you want to give this someone who you have a new relationship with everything. You want to build this product and make it the best, and those other guys that have a competitive product, it sucks, and you're going to be better in so many ways, but you are poor as heck. You haven't been paying yourself. You don't have any money to hire a big engineer team. That's a problem. Then you go through the agony of fundraising. You have lots of folks that think they know things. Half of them actually do, and half of them don't. It's really tough to tell which. But 95% of them will tell you no, and that's sucky too. Then you get past that hurdle. You have some money, you have a product, you have customers, but the problem set changes. You got really good at caring for these customers here, and now all of a sudden you have so many of them, you can't spend an hour with that customer anymore. You have to hire someone who can spend an hour with them, and how do you know who to trust with that? That's really scary. And then the final agony is if you do well, people will come after you, which is sort of a natural effect of capitalism. Things that work well attract other entrepreneurs that want it to work well for them. And so all of a sudden you have a new problem set to work on. And lastly, if the fairy tale story works out well and you've gone through this 6 year or so process, you've sold your business, and now what? So there's, in school, in life, there's a roller coaster ride between what looks good on paper in the white text and the agony of reality in the green. And I hope that a couple of the things that we dive into, a couple of the ideas, whether you're working inside of a big company or working on your own company, can spare you some of the green and keep you in the white. Okay, if this is what the path looked like qualitatively, and Florence is, here we are in 2019, so we founded in 2015. February of 2016 was our first customer. We're now working on a scaling problem. We have just under 30 employees. We're trying to get to 50 in the next few months. We're trying to get to a couple hundred next year. And then hopefully we have those sort of happy agonies and happies on the way to acquisition, but we're kind of there right now. But what does that look like from a metrics perspective? Let's line up some hard metrics on the same graph. We've been lucky to have a pretty good revenue story. We went from 0 to now in the millions of dollars in revenue, so revenue's grown by about 20 times in a 3-year period. Our users have grown by about 15 times in a 3-year period, and our enterprise value, every time we raise money, we're able to get the market to say, okay, we'll invest in your company is worth this when we give you $1 million. It started at worth $2 million, and now it's a nice double-digit multiple of that. So I feel like the street cred here is that we've gotten to the 54-month, we sort of know what we're doing stage. Cool. Qualitative, quantitative, social. Yeah, it's cool making slides that go like this or like this. But the other thing that has been fun, and you guys in this room are so talented, you will have the choice to decide how to dedicate your intellectual energies. And so the thing that's been fun for us founding the business across the street, and Georgia Tech is not terribly well known for life science, right? But we were able to find this opportunity where we felt like we could help our fellow mankind through life science. And now we are supporting 1 in every 4 cancer research team. And that's a pretty darn good feeling. All right, enough about us. What about you? A couple ideas. You guys, because you've gotten into this awesome institution, have the most important characteristic, which is curiosity. The best employees the best bosses that I've worked for, the best peers I've had, whether it's at BCG or Microsoft or at Florence, and the best team members that I've hired on to Florence had this attribute. If you're curious, people want to come to you and work out problems, and that's really why you get paid. You don't get paid because your job's easy. You get paid because your job's hard. Your job is hard because people present problems to you. If you're curious, it's a much different mindset, and you're able to cope with the hard stuff much better if you're solving a puzzle rather than fighting a demon. The other thing getting curious helps with is it allows you to discover things that less curious teams and less curious people haven't. And that gives you a competitive advantage when you're a young little company out there, or you're making your way in a department in a big company like a Medtronic. The next thing to invest in terms of your career is to think about owning a set of switches and dials inside your organization. And the sooner you can figure out what your niche is, the sooner you can be curious about how to get good at it, the sooner you can get curious about how to make it better, and all of a sudden you're ahead of your boss in terms of what your boss expects. One of the challenges that we have with scaling right now is that I see my job used to be like, okay, there's this cancer research team, they're drowning in work, how can we build software to help them? That's not really my job anymore. My job's like, I have so many gears and switches and dials, like in this Russian cargo plane, that I can't do it myself. How do I segment out a set of gears and help that person own it so that first they can feel confident and help me, but I can then help them have bigger and bigger piles of switches and dials to be in command of. So figure out what you want that to be in your first job. What's switches you want to watch? This is the hardest one, and I think the last one in this section. And I didn't really get this until probably like 5 years ago, and I've been lucky to be in some prestigious jobs, and I went to an okay school and all that sort of stuff. It's not about doing your job. You got to do, but there's lots of people that do. It's about how can you build and do at the same time. And there's lots of sort of hackneyed expressions about this. We're fixing the race car when it's going around the track. But that's sort of the idea. If you combine these three things, and no matter where you start, if you're just out of undergrad or it's your next job after you took some time off to go to grad school, those three things will serve you well whether you're the chief operating officer or whether you're an analyst. Doesn't matter. Okay. So let's say you've honed those three skills in the next gig that you have after you leave tech. What do you do if you have an idea? What do you do if you want to start a business? I am not the expert. There's lots of entrepreneurs out there. We've had some success. But I feel confident in these things because I keep running into them from investors, from the Flashpoint program, from ATDC, where we were a member for several years and were tremendously supportive of us. These are the patterns that I saw during that period of time. You can either be smart or you can work hard. And I am not smart. What it turns out is that where you want to get is you want your product to help lots of people and then people to pay you so that you can hire more people and you can have this living organism that is a company. The way you do that is by finding product market fit. You have to come to this epiphany that says, oh, this thing I've built can help these people and we can get it to market sustainably and repeatably. And what I found is that's kind of an area under a curve. It's a simplistic, I was a liberal arts major, so I can't do a compound curve. But it's sort of like this. You either come up with a really good idea and build the area vertically, or you just beat your head against the wall till you can see a pattern and you can build it horizontally. So one example of this is the iPhone. There was virtually no market testing. Of course, the old Henry Ford saw is that if you asked consumers what they would wanted before the Model T came out, they would have said faster horses. That's what this is. No market testing, you're an oracle. There's probably one or two of you in this room that are that person. It wasn't me. I wish it was. But you need to sort of figure out whether you're that person. The odds of your startup succeeding if you take this attitude is about 1 in 1,000. It's really hard. The other way to do it is to not be smart. And if you're not smart, like we were not smart, we interviewed 248 people in clinical research that were doing clinical research operations. So we actually interviewed closer to 400 because it took us 150 to figure out who we should actually be talking to. And then we did 248 just in that domain. And the odds of your startup succeeding this way, I'd like to think is more like 1 in 3. There's this red line on here because you can think about the horizontal axis as either just the count of customers that you talk to, or you can think of the time, because you can only, if you have a small team, it's you and a couple buddies, you can only do so much of this in a day. And if you've raised money, there's a point in time where the amount you've raised, let's say if it's early on, you've raised $250,000 or $500,000, you're going to run out of that money at some point. Maybe you're burning $50K a month. So that's 10 months. You have 10 months to figure it out and get to a milestone, get to product market fit before you run out of money. And believe me, as an entrepreneur, you watch that clock every day. So the idea is to get there before you cross that line, not after you cross that line. And that drives the next couple ideas in terms of entrepreneurship that I'd love to share with you. Okay, so we decided, at least in my model, I'd rather work hard than be smart, or I know how to be successful doing that. And I know that 1 or 2 folks in here will have the oracular idea of inventing an iPhone-like thing, and you don't have to do that. The remaining 60 of you will probably need to do it this way, and that's great. That's part of your entrepreneurial journey. You still get the gold ring at the end. But this is the northeastern carpet beetle. What? So if you're thinking about this red line, what you want to do is make that $500,000 before you get to product market fit last as long as possible. So enters the northeastern carpet beetle. We stayed in a lot of cheap hotels during 2016, and I thought I was doing awesome because I was giving myself so many more weeks by behaving that way so that I didn't have to be smart I could be less smart longer in order to find product market fit before we ran out of money. Until I brought home the northeastern carpet beetle, and it ate $700 worth of my wife's clothes. So why do I bring this story up? Mead Sutterfield, who's a prominent investor here in Atlanta, talks about a term, unnatural acts. You're here to, if you're building your company, you're here to work hard. You're trying to get to that answer. You're trying to build that area under the curve of your smarts and your hard work to get to product market fit. But avoid unnatural acts. Avoid things that piss off your co-founders. Avoid destroying your wife's wardrobe. Avoid showing up on the doorstep of an investor's home. Like, that stuff makes for a good story, but don't do that stuff. If you guys are plenty smart. You can avoid the northeastern carpet beetle problem. Another way to make more progress towards product market fit before you get to that red line is to have some heuristics, have some templates that guide your discovery of information. Remember setting the stage earlier, being curious. How can you maximize the impact of your curiosity? And this is where we had a great experience at the Center for Deliberate Innovation and Flashpoint here at Georgia Tech. I recommend you going on the site. You can go now. I'm not that much to look at. You can go look it up and learn more. A couple of these ideas are what we garnered from our education inside the Center of Deliberate Innovation. It allowed us to make those 248 customer meetings on our journey to product market fit much more effective, to the point where it probably would have been 300, it would have been 350, and we would have run out of money. So one of the concepts of Flashpoint is to turn things upside down, because humans are programmed to be polite. And if you show your uncle this little software program that you built, your uncle will say, "Tim, that's awesome. Great job. Like, the cursor turns purple and you move it over here. Incredible. You're going to go far." You'll have the same conversation with your first couple customers or prospective customers, either because they just want to be polite, or it's so painful to tell you how much your product sucks that they're going to make up a different thing. It's weird. People will lie to you to your face. And so the way that you can get past that is to start turning things upside down. For example, during an interview, you can say, without telling that prospect what your product is, let's say it's a new type of shock absorber for a car that cushions bumps. They're repaving my street. I don't know. I guess that's why I thought of that. You could say to them, thanks, Mr. Engineer at General Motors. What I've heard, though, is that cars are plenty cushy these days. There's really not a use for any type of new shock absorber for a car. And if he goes, "You know what, Tim, you're right. Oops, you don't have a product." But if he laughs, or if he goes, "Well, that's crazy," all of a sudden you can hear the change in their voice, and all of a sudden you've proven without a shadow of a doubt, without getting any social politeness in the way, that you have something that's meaningful to that person. That's one trick. The other trick is this weird Yoda-like. Has anyone seen Merrick? Does anyone know who Merrick First is? So he's a computer science professor. He's sort of like a Yoda-like character himself, and he phrases it this way. There are certain things that people can't avoid doing in their job. And if they're a manager in a big corporation with a budget to buy a technology or a new startup thing, or if it's a consumer, that if you're caring for your 3-year-old or you want to find a better restaurant to eat on Friday night, you're going to look for a restaurant on Friday night. You can't avoid it. You're going to do it. So figuring out behaviors that people can't avoid doing and putting your invention in the path of that unavoidable behavior is another trick to get to an answer faster. Last point, and then we're going to get to wrapping up. The last trick is a little bit like the fooling the person by saying, I don't think people want comfier cars. You see the opposite of that behavior when you say, here's my comfy car seat. And then they say, you know what? I'd buy it if you could come back and maybe it was leather. And maybe if the shock absorber underlying it was electronic or had a different type of spring in it. And there's an old adage that about when someone encounters a homeless person in the street and says, I'm just going to run into this burrito shop. Can I get you a burrito? And the guy goes, yeah, sure, great. So you get the burrito, and he says, well, can I get some sour cream on it too? Yeah, okay, yeah, sour cream. Can I get lettuce and peanut beans? Yeah. Wait a minute. Why am I doing this? I'm getting you a burrito. Well, I wasn't hungry. And that's what happens when you call on customers. If they're asking for leather cushions, they're asking for springs, they're asking for things around your product, that means they don't care about your product. They're just trying to build the story in their head about when could they get to a point where they can help you out as a human. When could they get to a point where they could maybe justify, because they like you, they want to build a relationship with you. And so you have to be on alert for the burrito phenomenon. The last point is sweeping back to what I'd encourage you to work on as you come out of school, be you an undergrad or a grad student. How do you do and build in the same time? If you want to work in startups, if there's 5 people, you have no choice. If you want to be in the senior management team at a big organization, you also have no choice. So latch on to the idea and look for opportunities to do both. You've been assigned a process. You've been assigned this set of gauges inside this Soviet cargo plane. Okay, you can do those gauges and switches. But how do you build a process to make it better? All right, how you can help. One of the things, I'm a Bostonian. I got lucky and married a Southern girl and found myself in Atlanta about 5 years ago. It's been one of the best experiences in my life because Atlanta is at this perfect part of the its startup ascension. It's not as big as Boston or even as an Austin in terms of a technology hub. And because of that, like any small entity, it's growing like mad and the change is happening every day. And that makes it easier, in my opinion, for you to be involved. So my ask of you is to continue the ascension of Atlanta as a startup hub by going out and building a company. If it's not next month, make it next year. If it's not next year, make it next decade. All that's possible. And selfishly, we're hiring like crazy. I'm in one of the smartest ecosystems of brains right here at Tech. Come join us. We're hiring for internships full-time. I'd love to work with all you. Thanks for your time today. "32 minutes, not bad."
Now we'll open it up for questions. Just to remind you that this is being video recorded, so please wait till one of us reaches you with the mic.
Hello, Sven Voigt. So you said you narrowed down like the people you were interviewing. Did you do that based on what sort of data they were collecting?
Yeah, I'll preface it by saying there's for sure women and men that are much more precise about this methodology than me. It was simple pattern recognition after a while. Wait a minute, 2 calls ago, that person said exactly those same 3 words. That's really interesting. And then you would start to modify your questions to see if you could get the next person. So in this process, 200 and some odd, even though you could probably get to a statistically significant sample at 200 plus, there was so much evolution in how we would structure the interview trying to get to an answer that it was less about data and more about more of a qualitative analysis, more of a judgment call.
Hey, Ryan. My name's Peter. I have a question.
Peter.
Ryan. I have a question about the customer exposure process for you guys. Was there any meeting in particular that was poignant that made you either make some pretty significant changes to the product or gave you significant doubts about the product? Or both?
The thing that we, another thing, it's a great question. An expert about that question is a guy named Steve Blank, who wrote a book, 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And that's a lean startup book. There's been lots of derivatives of that are probably more entertaining to read. But his view of important moments came down to whether people, came down to this sentence. It was, oh, well, no, I think it is important to have those springs, those new type of springs in the cushion of the car seat. Okay, well, then you as the interviewer say, okay, well, let me get this straight. You do think it is more important. And if there was a product that could do X, Y, and Z in service of that goal, would that be interesting? Would that be interesting? That? And then they say yes, and then you say, do you have budget to support that interesting project? And then all of a sudden, they've turned from an interview into a customer. And so the first time we were able to say those 2 sentences was cool as hell.
One of the problems I think entrepreneurs have in following this methodology that you laid out was they try to introduce a solution too early in the process. And I guess the question I have is, how do you get the attention of these potential customers? In other words, convince them to sit down and talk to you if you don't really have something to offer them as a solution. And I guess how far in the process did you get before you pivoted from discussions of problems versus discussions of solutions?
Awesome. That's such an awesome question. I think by my last answer, it was almost accidental. It was almost accidental, right? We were always, and you guys have the power of curiosity by being either a grad student or undergrad right now. You can at least, folks will take pity on you and want to help your research project. And for the first bit, that's what we were doing. And then when it became time where we felt like we knew enough to be credible, we started to switch from being the student, not to the master, but just to be credible. Then folks would take our calls based on some fact we put out. But we sort of flailed around for maybe 3 months in that haze between just asking for interviews sort of as a favor and into ones that were really intentional.
When you were founding Florence, who did you decide who you wanted to partner up with? Because obviously, like some of us have partnered up with friends or whatever before on projects, and sometimes that doesn't actually go over so well. So what was the process you actually used to weed out who you're going to work with?
Yeah, that's what you're doing. Huh. Oh, yeah. Let's go back and look at that. There is interviews here. But it probably took me 6 months and it was sort of accidental. It's, in the timeline of starting your startup, there should probably be 6 months to a year where you're just thinking about that question. And you're probably working or going to school. You haven't quit yet. And for me, I actually tried to recruit our CTO to go do a different project than Florence. And he said, no, Ryan, I think this is a worthwhile project. And I was like, that totally caught me off guard. And I thought about it for like a night and knew he was right. And so there might be some sort of moment where you feel like there's that equality and that esprit de corps. Maybe it's that sort of sign. But I guess the only answer to your question is it just takes time. You have to spend a lot of time meeting a lot of folks and thinking about whether they're the right fit. Cool. You guys are great.
So Ryan, you talked a lot about how you got to, what is the trajectory here to get, to the product and how to grow the company. Will you talk a little bit about beyond finding those 1 or 2 first team members? When you got to, how many people on your team today?
30.
30. So how do you go setting processes and procedures in place and defining the culture really of a company that it's a big team now that I'm sure you're serving every day. So what was that process like, shifting from just focusing on this product being successful to now I'm responsible for 30 people's lives, for pretty much, or livelihood?
Yeah, it's scary when you phrase it that way. One of the things I didn't put up was like, know what you're not good at, and that's one of the things I'm not great at. I was lucky. So my co-founder, Andres Garcia, we figured out the product and were able to get to product market fit. That was awesome. We found shortly thereafter Angela Nelms, who is a tech BME grad and was working as a researcher at Emory. And not only did she have that subject matter expertise, but she was really good at process and figuring out how to plan ahead and build culture. And so the only answer to that question is, I'm a good product market fit guy. I'm not the best at creating that internal infrastructure, and so I was lucky to find a friend. Does spring break start the minute you're out of here?
No, it actually starts Friday, but
Okay.
I'd say about a third of students in here have just finished taking an entrepreneurial finance exam. So,
Bless you.
One of the things that we've been talking about in class is dealing with investors. We talked about from a financial standpoint in terms of valuations and that sort of thing, but you've gone through now multiple rounds of financing. I'm just curious, could you give us some insights on how do you work with investors and maybe some of the issues that you've seen, things that you learned from the process, approaches to how your venture was valued, those types of things that might be useful to these students who are now studying entrepreneurial finance?
Yeah, the thing that's top of mind for us now is the difference between West Coast venture and East Coast or Southeastern venture. You know, a lot of those interested in entrepreneurship know the big names like Andreessen Horowitz or you know, whatever, Index, all the big funds. But what is useful to think about, and there's books that can help you do this, is putting yourself in the shoes of the investor about what they're trying to do. Like when they go home and explain to their husband about how their day was, it's actually, a lot of it's not about your company. A lot of it's about that they wanted to raise $500 million for this fund, and they have to answer to those investors. And if they raise $500 million, they can only put their money in a certain number of companies because they only have so many hours in the day. So I think the thing that was a revelation for me, I was all about, well, is my spreadsheet right, and is my deck sexy, and are they going to be into this? But a lot of their investment decisions weren't about me. It was about, like, did my company allow them to take their fund where their fund wanted to go? So a little bit of that empathy was helpful. It was also a good trick to protect my ego, right? You get told a lot during this fundraising process. And knowing that it's not you, like your company's totally legitimate, it's just either too big or too small for what they're trying to do, or too much young or too old, or like that's not your fault. You're building a great business. Yeah, and there's so many variables into that. It's like, is this the right sector? But it's also, we've had several of the big funds come to us that want to invest $10 million in our business, and our market doesn't move. We're not buying scooters, right? That's different. You can put lots of capital to work. But our market doesn't move fast enough to absorb the $10 million, and all that happens is that VC gets to own the business that I've invited carpet beetles into my home to build. Like, that sucks, so I'm not going to give them my business. So it's investment thesis, but it's also, there are things they won't tell you when they tell you your investment thesis.
Brian, do you have... Is there a question there? Go ahead. Okay. I have a question about, do you have any investor stories about, you know, who is good to work with and why?
That's so dangerous.
Okay, never mind. You're on tape, I know.
Let me try and think of an archetype. Your mileage may vary. I'm a one foot in front of the other, the agony of the journey. There are businesses, like a scooter business, where like the hype precedes them and then the money props up the hype, and folks can create this self-fulfilling existence out of a hype cycle, and there are investors that work really great with that, and they've found their niche. You have to figure out what your business is like and what you're like. If you're not that, you will make a mistake bringing them on your board or bringing them into your business. So it's a little bit of trying to find the category that you fit into and make sure you talk to those investors. Yeah, I had one trip to, it's not a good, come find, I'll buy you a beer, I'll tell you the story later.
If you have an exit, will it be your decision or will it be an investor's decision?
That's a great question. You know, where we are right now, we're conscious in doing right by our investors, but there isn't a single investor that has the board authority to decide if it's the end of the road for us, and that feels pretty good. That's another element that goes into deciding whether you want to do what most people see as this brass ring, which is, oh, I raised $5 million. Again, you've slept with the carpet beetles. Protect the thing you've built.
Okay, just one more. When you exit and you're a gazillionaire, will you start another company or will you be an investor?
I don't know. What a wonderful choice that would be to have. I've made a couple investments. I've certainly been a better operator than I have been an investor, so that might be it. But at the same time, I have a 4-year-old who's just an awesome dude, and it'd be nice not to be on an airplane all the time.
Who would you describe as the champion of your product? In terms of the teams you work with, is it the IRB? Is it the research teams?
Great question. It's the research teams. These the people that are really on the front line that are handing out experimental cancer medications are nurses that are along the journey with these patients in a very stressful period of the patient's lives. And then after the patient goes home and they've just had this emotionally draining event, they're asked to fill out reams of paperwork about it. And that's awful. So when you show that in a couple clicks, you can take what used to be a 30-minute process and make it a 5-minute process, they become the champions. And then the hard part is they're the folks that are seeing the patient, but they're not in the IT department or the director of the research center. So how do you translate that enthusiasm into someone who can write a check? That was the thing we struggled with for a long time. Great question.
How you doing, man? Nice socks.
Thank you.
So you said you've had some successes. What is the measure of success? You also mentioned being able to sell. So I guess that's what your aim is, but what is the measure for success at this point in the company?
That's so cool. Maybe I should have thought more about that before I got up in front of 60 people. For me, it's the fact that we've created this organism that 30 people thereabouts are paying the rent out of nothing, out of an idea, out of a series of frameworks that Georgia Tech helped us create. Paul Judge is a well-known entrepreneur here, Tech alum. And his mantra is something from nothing. And we have 30 people that are paying the rent just out of thin air, and that feels pretty good. And as a result, I'm less of a technical guy, more of a sales guy. A good way to keep score about how many people you can bring along with you is how your sales are doing. So I think it's something you created from nothing that folks are willing to write a check for is the meaning of it for me.
All right. My name's Henry. As somebody that wants to start a business one day, I'm curious about, you started your career at BCG, you didn't talk too much about that. How do you think that kind of sets you up for becoming an entrepreneur? And would you recommend that for someone, or would you recommend maybe a more technical field or something like that?
I think you got to, yes, but I don't think it has to be management consulting. There's very good companies where you might be an engineer, and if you find that that company has a passion for excellence and training you to do something in a way that creates an excellent product. That's what BCG was all about. Part of the torture of BCG is that every day I would build 20 PowerPoint slides, and my partner on the case I was on would take one. But what that taught me is that towards the end of it, I would build 10 slides, and she would take 3. And I just got better. And so if you're in a culture that sort of forces you to get better, I don't know if the role itself matters all that much. That's a good question.
All right, so you said you're hiring a lot of people and, kind of invited people to join you. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of the overall culture of the company and the kind of people that you are looking for and how difficult it is to find the profile that would thrive in your company?
Yeah, we're kind of nice guys, quote unquote, to a fault. So we're interested in people that are curious. I put a lot of them on the slide. Are curious, can do and build at the same time, have a passion for getting it right. But we are not, there's not a lot of ego. There's not like we beat that competitor. I think there's more of a gentle touch. One of the, it wasn't made to stick, but there's a business book that identifies 3 types of companies. I should have just answered with this. There are mechanics, there are mercenaries, and there are mothers. The mechanics, Oracle is a technical example. There's probably physical ones that are like this, where you want to get the product exactly right and have all the right features. There are mercenaries like Apple that says, we're going to build this thing called an iPhone and you're going to love it. You may want a different brightness and screen level that we don't provide. Who cares? And then there are mothers that care intensively about what the customer is doing and then just assemble the product around the customer's opinion. That's who we are.
Please, everyone, give a round of applause one more time. And thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.